ask that is because when I first came across you, it was for a TEDx talk on YouTube called Managing Rheumatoid Arthritis and All Aspects of Health. It was a fascinating talk, and you talked about so many different areas of well-being, but you've achieved a huge amount in terms of your own health. But what brought you to do that TEDx talk? What was the motivating factor? And because I think our listeners would be really interested to know what was in that talk and why it was relevant to you.
Sure. Well, I would say, we're all thrown something that we have to learn how to work with, deal with, try to understand, try to solve. And for me, one of those big factors was the level of pain that I happened to be going through. And that was when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was about 20 years of age. So that ended up slowing me down, limiting me on a lot of factors, down to mental state, physical state, ability to do everyday movement, and feeling like I was 97 years of age. And I just decided I'm not going to just roll over and take it. I'm going to actually try to learn something and solve this problem, because at the end of the day, everything is simply a math problem, and there's a solution to every problem. Therefore, let's just call it a math problem. So with that said, I began just kind of studying and trying to understand alternative approaches of medicine. My doctor at the time, my rheumatologist, she was very crippled, wheelchair bound. She is no longer with us. She had passed away. Apparently with the arthritis kind of taking over her body. Well, that was one of the drivers for me. It's like, I don't want this to become my life. I don't want to have to rely solely on these pharmaceutical drugs to keep me alive, if you will, and my organs functioning properly and my ability to move. So I started to study more of the natural approach to medicine and preventative care, anti-inflammatory care, and in tune with that as well, a lot of lifting and structured programming around that. So then I had someone approach me one day. The TED group reached out and asked if I would do a talk and share my story. So from there, it kind of rolled out as what I do from a nutritional standpoint, what I've learned, what I've done trial and error with a multitude of times over and over again, whether it's nutritional, emotional, meditative, hot, cold therapy, acupuncture, yoga, flow, mobility, strength conditioning. And my TED talk it was one of the more fun experiences I've ever been a part of. It's funny though, when you look back at them, because it's probably like 10 years old at this point. You always want to do it over again. There's more information you want to spit out. To me, I see it as it's dated now, but it's really not. So, yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating because as a personal trainer, you do come across very many inflammatory conditions, and rheumatoid arthritis, or RA, is an inflammatory disease, isn't it? And it's not like a typical arthritis, which would be wear and tear, or osteoarthritis and things like that. It is the body attacking itself. And I think one of the things, particularly when I'm starting to talk to a client who comes in with an inflammatory illness, and one that's immune based, there's a huge amount of just there's just questions and questions and questions, because there's very little knowledge, and sometimes there seems to be very little rhyme or reason, because you were incredibly active. You were very young when you were in your late teens when you were diagnosed, if I'm correct.
Yes, I was 20 years of age when I was technically diagnosed. Symptoms started probably around 18. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's so interesting about you is that you, it's almost like the traditional thought and the traditional kind of path that the kind of medical establishment kind of pushed people down, you were not interested in. I mean, what was it in you that made you question the way your path could be? What is it? I mean, other than seeing, that lady who was greatly affected by it, what is it in you that kind of pushes you to inquire about a better route?
I think with every issue, with every problem, it stems from something, whether that be, it's easy to say it's genetic. It's easy to say, I want to find the root cause of it. And for me, the pharmaceutical approach seemed like a Band-Aid. It seemed like, well, this is just going to slow the damage. This is going to slow the inflammatory response. It's not going to stop it. It's not going to reverse the damage that's already been done. And it's a temporary solution, and the risks do not outweigh the benefits, in my opinion. And I don't want to be an experiment of like, well, let's try this and see how this works, when it's something that could potentially be so invasive to so many parts of your body from a function standpoint, whether it's your internal organs, whether it's your DNA, just your body in general responding to it. And alongside that, I was, a broke college student, and seeing the expense of it and knowing, I'm not going to be under my parents' wing forever. This is very expensive. You look at the average cost of a biologic, which is the kind of standard go-to. So let's just say for the audience, when you're diagnosed with an inflammatory disease like this, common practice, I will not ever claim to be a nurse or doctor, but common practice in that medical world is they have to give you methotrexate first, which is a very inexpensive drug, very hard on the liver. I'm still not really understanding the full chemical breakdown of it, meaning I don't see the purpose of this. So they put you on that first initially because insurance companies require it.
It's a chemotherapy drug, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
it is. And when it's a requirement for insurance, to me, that tells you right away it's not for the right reasons. That's just a numbers game. And I'm a human being. I don't need to play with numbers with my body and what happens to it. The next step is then they typically put you on a biologic, which is essentially something that's sitting in a lab for years upon years, as they're developing that. And that's going to essentially create a different response in your body. And so I went on that, and that's on average about $4,800 a month for 2 injections. That's 4,800, US dollars. That's a lot of money. Now, to expect anyone to be able to afford something like that also is not a guarantee. It's essentially a buffer for a period of time for you to not be in pain. It's not a long-term solution, in my opinion. And so that was another big push for me. Like, there's got to be another way, because we've been practicing medicine since the beginning of time. And you look at where medicine was at one point to where medicine is now is very different. And I just firmly believe there has to be less invasive and more proactive ways of caring for oneself, especially when it comes to mitigating an inflammatory response, such as rheumatoid arthritis. The inflammatory diseases, they're endless. There's so many of them, right? Rheumatoid arthritis happens to be one it's not fun. It's very invasive. It's very damaging. It's considered a chronic disease because of the magnitude of damage it can do to not just the joints, but the internal organs. So it's something to take seriously, not lightly. And with that said, why not get to the root cause of it and find more natural approaches that we can take control of ourselves, such as, and that's when we can get into, different approaches of just the day-to-day of what people can do to decrease levels of inflammation, but also to dig to the root cause of the problem. Sorry, that was a long tangent.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. No, what happened when did you discuss some of the things, some of the approaches that you were going to take with your physicians, and what was their take on some of your solutions? Because you came at it from your own angle, which wasn't the medicalized angle. It was very much kind of like, how can I support my body? What was the general kind of, did you get any feedback at all on what you were doing?
I think I got kind of the confused dog head tilt. When a dog tilts its head to the side and looks confused at you, that was kind of a common response. Like, well, why won't you just take this drug? Why won't you just try this first? And so I started to ask them, and I ask a lot of questions. I think that's a great way to learn and a great way to have conversation, and, for human beings to tap into their brains a little bit more. And the questions I guess they didn't always like. So after that one doctor, she had passed, to switched on to a new doctor, and he I think I asked him about, the physical lifestyle of just lifting, actual weights, doing strength trainings to create more support around your joints. And that was very new age for him. He's like, well, I don't know if that's going to work. I've not ever heard of that, which is weird to me. Like, how is that not a discussion had with physicians to their patients of, hey, before we put you on this medication, let's discuss what your day-to-day looks like. What is your lifestyle like? And where can we potentially make some either changes or additions, such as, things in your control that are very inexpensive, doing some yoga, doing some flow work, getting vitamin D in the morning, going for walks, changing up your diet, removing inflammatory foods from your system. Those aren't conversations had. And they're not conversations that I think I've now, in my 18 years of having this, I've had 4 different physicians, rheumatologists. And not one of them has really made that a prevalent point of conversation of, well, let's talk about your lifestyle.